So let's continue with this SQL Server and Visual Studio tutorial. So in this part we are going to insert data into the database. So basically we are going to create a basic application like this. It contains of two text boxes, so one text boxes for sensor name and another text box for sensor type. So here we can specify a sensor name and here as sensor type, and then we can just click save here, and that sensor name and the sensor type will be saved into the SQL Server Database. Typically when we click save here, a query like this will be inserted, so insert will be executed. So insert into sensor, that's the name of the table, and the different columns, sensor name, sensor type, which we have here, and then the values, in this case sensor 1 and temperature like this. So first we need to just create a project in Visual Studio. This Windows Forms app template will be used in order to create a Windows desktop application, and then we will start creating the graphical user interface, which is just two text boxes in this case, a sensor name and a sensor type like this. And then we also needed to install this NuGet package in order to communicate with the database, this Microsoft.data.sql client. So when we have installed the NuGet package, created this basic graphical user interface with two text boxes, we need to figure out the connection string that we are going to use in our application. So then you have different options, and as mentioned, it's the same as you log into this SQL Server Management Studio. You can choose between Windows Authentication, which is basically the current Windows account that you are using when logging onto your computer. So then you need to specify a string here in your code, string, connection string, and then you need to specify the server. In my case, it's the name of my computer and / the name of the instance, which is SQL Express like this. So that's the name of my computer, and that's the name of the instance. You will find this name in your SQL Server Management Studio. And then you need to specify the name of the database. In my case, it's the sensor system. And in order to use Windows authentication, you just specify integrated security equals to true. Typically also, you need to specify that you need to trust the server certificate, and then just set trust server certificate equals to true. If you want to use SQL Server authentication, you need to also, instead of using integrated security, you need to specify your username. Then you can use this SA password, SA user, and the password for your SA user. And also here you typically may want to include this trusted certificate equals to true. So we have already created our Visual Studio project. Here's the name of the project. You can call your project whatever you like. I have just called it Sensor App. And then I have installed this NuGet package, which you just click here on Sensor App, select Manage NuGet Packages, and then go to Browse, and then search for this Microsoft Data.sql client, and then just click on this one. Click on this one and then install it. I have already installed it, so you see here it is already installed here under dependencies. Then next we just need to create our graphical user interface, and just basically two text boxes, one text box for the sensor name. I can just make it a little bit bigger, another one for the sensor type like this. I can also use a label on top of each of them, just to specify the name, like this. Typically also we want to have a button, so when we enter something here and click on a button, this information will be saved to the database. So then also a button is needed like this. So now we have two text boxes and a button, and then we can start specifying the name of this form. The default name is form1, so that we can call it sensor app or whatever you like. So just make sure to specify a proper name for your application. Then this label, this should be the sensor name. This, and this one should be the sensor type, like this. And then these two text boxes also, you should these have a default name. If you see here in the property window, the default name is called TextBox1 and this is TextBox2. Typically you want to have a proper name for them. It could be txt sensor name, like this, and this one could be txt sensor type name or something, like this. Now, basically we are also the same for the button. Instead of button 1, you want to specify a proper name, button save or something, and then also a proper name for it. So the default name is button 1, but you can change it to save or something, like this. So now I guess the graphical user interface is finished. We can just start our application to see if it works as expected. And of course nothing will happen now because we haven't created the necessary code yet, but it's up and running. We can specify a sensor name here and a sensor type here and click save. But so far we haven't created the code to save this information to the database. So that's the next part. So now we want to create the code for what happens when you click this button. So typically when you click this button, we want to save this information to the database. So basically we can just double click on that button, and then an event handler will be created automatically for us. It is called button save underscore click. This means when you click this button, the code that are between here will be executed. And then typically we need to create this connection string. So I can go to my PowerPoint and just copy the connection string that we have created here. So I just copy that one, like this. So that's the connection string. I'll just close that one. Now we have the connection string. Here I specify the server, which is my server. Of course you need to use your own server. Here's the database name. You can use that name or your own name. And then we have this integrated security true, and then trusted certificate equals to true, like this. So that's the connection name. So far it gives a warning it is not in use, so we need to start creating the code. And the next thing we need to do is to create the query string that should be executed. So then we can just specify a string, and we can name a variable called SQL query or something. And then here by default it gives us some example. We can use that one as an example and just modify it, or we can just create it from scratch like this. And then, as you remember from the PowerPoint, this is the query that will typically be executed, this one. Also I can go to this SQL Server Management Studio and test it here before I use it in Visual Studio. So then I can select new query here, and then in another new query I can select star from sensor like this, click execute, and then you see there are no data into this table. But if I run this query, which is specified here, insert sensor, sensor name, comma sensor type, and some values, sensor 1 and temperature. And then I can click just execute, and one row affected. It means that this is saved into the database, and then I can just run this query, select star from sensor, click execute, and then you see this sensor has been created in the database. So its sensor ID 1 is automatically generated, while the sensor name is sensor 1 and the sensor type is temperature, like this. Basically now I can just copy that query inside here, like this, insert into sensor and a sensor name, sensor type, and some here I just hard code some value, and then we will replace these values for what the user is entering here in these two text boxes, like this. Next, we need to use create an SQL connection. So then we just specify SQL connection like this. And then we specify a name for it. I can just use con equals to new SQL connection like this. And then input to this one is this connection string that we have specified here. And then we need to just open that connection. So then we use con.open like this. Next, we need to specify an SQL command. So then SQL command like this. So now we have specified a command. Then we just need to specify command.execute non-query like this. And then finally, connection, which we have here. So then just connection dot close like this. So basically that's the code that we need to create. So close, which is a method like this. So that's the main code that we need to create. So inside this button handler here, we need to specify the connection string, which is like this. We need to specify our query. This is just a temporary query. We will improve it. So now we have just hard-coded sensor here, and now sensor 1 is already created in the database, so then we can change it to sensor 2, and like this, and then later we will replace this with the contents of these two text boxes. But so far we just make it like this, and then we create a connection using this built-in functionality, which is part of this Microsoft.data.sql client package. Then we need to open the connection, create a SQL command like this, and then use this execute non-query, and then we can finally just close the connection. Now let's just run this application. So far we are not using these two text boxes. We just use this save button, click save. Nothing happens here, but if we go to our SQL Server Management Studio and then select all from sensor, click execute, and then you see this sensor 2 has been created in the database. But now, instead of hard coding sensor 2, sensor 3, etc. here, we need to retrieve the data that are stored in these two text boxes. Then different ways to do that, but let's just create two strings here. So string sensor name equals to the contents of this sensor name text box, and then another one, string sensor type like this, which is the contents of this second text box called sensor type like this. And then instead of sensor 2 here, like this. So here we can have an end double quote. I'm using a plus sign, and then we just use this sensor name variable here, like this, and then another plus, and a double quote, like this, and then a double quote here, and then instead of temperature, we want to have sensor type like this, and then a new plus sign and a double quote like this. So now instead of hard-coded the sensor name and the sensor type, we are just retrieving the values that are stored in the different text boxes which we have here on the graphical user interface. So now we can save it, run it, and hopefully it will work. So now we can specify a sensor name here. Now we have sensor 1 and 2, then we just type sensor 3. That one could be temperature, it could be a pressure sensor like this. Click save. And nothing happens here, but if you go back to the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, run this query, and then you see this sensor 3 pressure has been created like this. So basically now we have created a very basic application in Visual Studio that communicates with an SQL Server Database, and then we have created 2 TextBoxes where we can specify the name of a sensor and a sensor type, and then when you click save, that value and that information will be stored in the SQL Server Database like this. So that was the first edition of our SQL application that are inserting data into the database. Of course, there are lots of improvements that can be made. So let's start with some basic improvements. Typically, you don't want to have so much code into this event handler, so you can typically create a separate method here. So then you can create a method, private, void, because it will not return anything, and you can call it save data or something like this. So that's, now we have created the method, and then basically we just take that code that is previously in this button save handler, you just remove it and put it into this save method instead. And then here we just call this save data method. Then we just specify save data like this. Now this is a small improvement. So instead of putting the code itself here in the button handler, we have created a separate method called save data, where we put the code, and then we just call that method from the event handler like this. And when we run the application, it will work in the same manner, but the code is a bit more structured. So that's the first step. The next step would be to create a separate class. So then here in my Solution Explorer, I just click on the project Sensor App in my case, and then just right click, add, and create a new folder. I can call it classes or something. So inside that folder I can create one or more classes. So let's just right click on that folder, add, and specify a new class. And then here you specify the name of the class. Since we are dealing with sensors, I can just call it sensor.cs like this, click add. And then in that folder, this sensor.cs class has been created, or the name of this class is called sensor, but the file where this class is stored is called sensor.cs. CS is short for C#. And here is the class created. So far it's empty, but typically we just want to copy the code that we have created in this save data method, and then we put it here in the class instead, like this. And then, sorry, I click undo. I also want to copy this method itself like this, so the save data method. So now we have a method here now, save data. We can I can just change the name, sensor, save sensor data. Of course, you can call the method whatever you like, but I just prefer call it save sensor data. And then I have just copied this code, which we have already created. But you can also see as this separate class, we don't get access to these text boxes like here. So this typically need to be an input argument to this save sensor method. So then you can just specify a string here, string sensor name, comma, string sensor type like this. And then you just remove those. Like this. And also here are lots of things that we don't need. So I just, you see these are gray, so these are not used. So then basically I can just delete them. We only need to use this one using Microsoft.data.sql client so far. And then we have created a method called class. And then instead of private here, we typically need to use public, since we are going to use it in our code here. So then in our class called sensor, we need to make this method called save sensor data or something. And the code is the same, but you have just put it into a new class and a new method like this. And then we can go back to this form1.cs, and then we don't need that code anymore. So I can just delete that part. I need those two, because here we are retrieving values from these two text boxes into these variables like this. And the next I need to just get access to this sensor class. So then I just type sensor, that's the name of the class, sensor. And then specify a name, new sensor like this. So as you see here, the name of the class is called sensor. And then I just, in order to start using that class and be able to access this method, you just need to declare a new object of that specific sensor class like this. And in addition, we need to specify the proper assembly here. So now we are not needing this Microsoft.data.sql anymore, because that is now used in the sensor.cs here instead. So we can remove it from here, but here we need to use using sensorapp.classes in order to get access to that specific class in this form1.cs like this. Now I remove that one and only use that one. And now we have created an object of that class, and now we can start or get access to this method we called save sensor data like this. So then we just use sensor.save sensor data, that's the name of the method that are created here in the class. And then that method needs two arguments, which is the sensor name and the sensor type like this. So basically that should be it. So far we have now 3 sensors in the database like this. Now let's just run our application and type sensor 4 and then something here, level sensor or something, click save. And then we go back to the SQL Server Management Studio, run this query, and then you see we now have 4 different sensors in the database like this. So we have created a basic application that are inserting some data into the database. We have now created a separate class that we are using, and other improvement would be to make a so-called stored procedure. So here you see an example of a stored procedure. Just like you create tables, you can also use this create and the procedure and the name of the stored procedure like this. And then you basically, a stored procedure is more or less like a function or a method, which makes it simpler to insert data into the database. So that's an example of this of a stored procedure. I will just call it save sensor. It has 2 inputs, sensor name and sensor type. And then inside here we just use this query, insert into sensor, sensor name, sensor type and values. And then here I specify alpha sensor name, which is this variable, and alpha sensor type, which is this variable. So let's go to the SQL Server Management Studio to create that stored procedure, and then we can later use it in our C# application. So then I just start by copying this code. From the PowerPoint, I go to my SQL Server Management Studio. Instead of this one, I just paste that code in. So basically, that's the code for creating this stored procedure, which you see here. So that's the code. That's the name of the store procedure. It has 2 input arguments, and this is the query that should be executed inside the store procedure. So basically, I can just click now execute. Commands completed successfully. And to make sure that this store procedure has been saved in the database, I can go here under programmability, click the plus sign, store procedure, click refresh, and then you see this store procedure called save sensor has been created in our database. So also here in SQL Server Management Studio, I can test this stored procedure. So I can basically copy this one, and instead of, no, I'm not going to create it, but I'm going to run it. So then I use this function x and save sensor. And then instead of this variable, I just specify a name here. So now, so far we have 4 sensors. So let's type sensor 5, and then sensor type like this. It could be a temperature, this also, like this. I can put everything on one single line. So this is how we execute a store procedure here in the SQL Server Management Studio. So you just use exec save sensor, which is the name of the store procedure, and then the different input arguments like this. And then I can just click execute, and 1 row affected. And if I go back to the select statement, then you see now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of sensors like this. Now we are back in Visual Studio. Here is the previous code. We are using an insert statement here, but now we have created a stored procedure that we want to use instead. So basically I can just delete that one. We need the connection string, which is here. We need to open a connection to the database, which is here. And then we need to use this SQL command. But now, instead of this query, we can just specify the name of the stored procedure, which is save sensor, like this. And then we need to specify that this should be a specific type. So then we just use command type. Like this. So then it's the command type is of type system.data.command-type.stored procedure, like this. If we just also in addition using this insert using system data data like this, we can also remove that part like this. So now we are here specifying that we are going to use a stored procedure called save sensor, and Visual Studio and C# knows that this is the stored procedure because we have created a command type equals to command type dot stored procedure like this. Next, we need to specify the input arguments. So then we just use command dot parameters like this, dot add, and then we can specify new SQL parameter like this. So the first parameter was input argument was sensor type, sensor name, and the value should be from this string sensor name, and then we just do the same for the other one as well. So then instead of sensor name, we need to specify sensor type, and instead of sensor name, we also here need to specify sensor type. So this is this variable, and this one is this variable, and here that's name of the input arguments, namely sensor name and sensor type, as you see here in this stored procedure that we have created like this. And instead of so basically that's it. So that's the updated code. It's more or less the same. We use the connection string. We open the connection to the database. We need to specify a SQL command. In this case, we are going to use this store procedure called save sensor data. And here we specify that this command type is of a store procedure. Here we specify the different parameters, namely sensor name and sensor type. So that's it. So let's just double check how many sensors we have in the database. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sensors. And then let's just run our application. The application should work in the same way. So now I just specify sensor number 6. And then also that could be pressure, temperature, whatever. It's not so important. Click save. Let's go back to our SQL Server Management Studio. Click execute. And then you see, we have created this new sensor called sensor 6, which is pressure of, which has pressure as a sensor type like this. So still there are many improvements to be made. Of course, the code structure, code quality can be improved a lot. But one more thing I want to show is that this connection string, now it's hard coded here as part of the class and the method. Typically you want to create this application for a customer or a client, and then create an executable application, and then send this application to the customer. And the customer typically uses another SQL server that you are using than when developing this application. Typically, so this is the server I'm using during development. But if I give this application to a customer or a client, he typically uses another SQL server, so also called the production server. And then he needs to be able to specify another server name, another database, other password, etc. here. So then typically it's no good idea to create the connection string as part of your code. So typically the connection string should be in a configuration file or something. So let's see how we can do that. Basically, we just right click here in the Solution Explorer, select add, specify new item. Here we have a different option. Here you could create classes, etc. Now we typically need to just, here you can select data. Since this configuration file is a typical XML file, and typically this default name of this file should be app.config, like this. So I just write the name app.config, click add, and then you see this file will now be created here as part of the solution. So then basically I just copy the connection string we have here, and I will remove that later, put it into the app.config file. So first we need to create a section called configuration, like this. So that's the config. So since this is an XML file, we need to have a start tag and an end tag, like this. And inside the configuration, we can specify lots of configuration that are used in our database, but we are going to create a connection string, so we need to use that one. And then we have a connection string start and a connection string end, like this. And inside here we can use, add name equals to, and then here we can specify a name of our connection string. We can call it database connection string or something. It's just a name. You can call it whatever you like. And then we specify the connection string itself, connection string equals to, and then I just copy this information. Typically here in this configuration file we only need one of those, and then a start and an end here, and like this. So here we specify the connection string, which is the same as previously, unless this one here we only want to have one slash, not double slash. And then we need to specify what kind of provider. So then it also here provider name equals to, and then we have this and here specify system dot data dot or instead of system you have specify here Microsoft data dot SQL client, which is this actually this NuGet package here, Microsoft.data.sql client, like this. So now basically we have added this app.config, which we have here in the Solution Explorer. We need to have a configuration section here, and then inside here we need to specify a section called connection strings, and then here we can actually have multiple connection strings if we want to, but typically no, we only need one. And then we need to specify a name here, database connection string or whatever. This is just a name that you can specify whatever you like. And here we define the connection string with the server, database, etc. like this. So when we have created the file and the connection string in app.config, we can go back to our class, and then instead of specifying the connection string here, we can just remove that part. So now sorry, I'm creating something wrong here, like this, yeah. So now instead of hard code the connection string, we just want to get the connection string that are now stored in this app config file. So then I just specify something called configuration manager. So configuration manager, that's a built-in feature in Visual Studio C#. And then dot connection string, and the name of the connection string, which you find here, which is database connection string, like this. Then you see when I started to include this configuration manager, this using system.configuration was created for us. So we need to, because this functionality is part of this assembly, like this. Then basically now we are retrieving the connection string by using this configuration manager functionality. Here we specify connection string and the name of the connection string, and dot connection string, which is just this name. So here's the name, and then dot connection string, which is specified here. So basically now we don't see the connection string anymore, because the connection string now is stored in this app.config, which we can change later if you want to. So now let's see if it's still working. In our database we now have 6 sensors. So let's just run our application. And now our connection string is now stored in this app.config. So then we specify we had this 6, didn't we? So now I want to create sensor number 7, and that could also be temperature, like this. Click save, and now we go back here and then just run this query. Then we have this new sensor called sensor 7, like this. So now we have created this basic application that are inserting these 2 values from these 2 text boxes into the database. When you click save here, we have improved the application step by step. Finally, we have put most of the code in a separate class called sensor, and then a separate method called save sensor data, and we've also put the connection string into a separate file called app.config. So finally, let's see how we can create an executable application. So now I just click here on the project, click publish. Here you have different options. Here I just choose folder option here, click next. I just want to put it into a separate folder. Click next, and here I can specify a folder. So let's just create a folder here on my temporary folder in Windows. I can call it sensor app like this, and then let's just specify that folder. This PC temporary folder and this sensor app folder like this, and then just click finish, close, and basically let's go to this folder, click sensor app, just give me a second. So far it's empty, but you need to click on this button that is popping up here, publish. Now it is building our project and create an executable application. So when it's finished, publish succeeded. I can just go to that folder, and then you see lots of files has been created here, and one of that file is called sensor app.executable. So that means I don't need Visual Studio anymore. I can just close Visual Studio and basically just open that executable application, and also I can distribute that folder to a customer or a client or on other computer that doesn't have Visual Studio installed. Then in order to open and use the application, I can just double click on sensor app.exe, and then you see this application pops up with the sensor name and the sensor type like this. And let's see if it works also. So then let's go to my database. Now we have 7 sensors, and then I can type sensor 8, which is also a temperature sensor like this, click save, and then go back to my management studio, and now you see this sensor number 8 has been created. It's some spelling mistake here, of course, but it has been stored in the database like this. So basically, that's the final application. We have now created an executable application. We can run it without using Visual Studio. And so far, this application is using the same database, but if you go into this file here called sensorapp.dll.config, open that one, and then you see the contents of this file is actually the same as this app config file. So basically, when we give this entire folder to the client, he can start the application by clicking on the executable application, and if you go into this sensorapp.dll.config, he can actually change the database information here in this XML file. So here you can change the server name, the database name, etc. And also he can add his username and password. And it's quite easy to change the connection string without actually going into the code in Visual Studio, because the client will typically will not have access to Visual Studio, and typically the client will neither have knowledge or skills in programming or Visual Studio, C#, etc. But he is able to just open the application by clicking the executable application, and open the configuration file by changing the connection string to the database he wants to use.